That was a long-winded.
No, that's a great answer. That it's so interesting, all these different elements that would exert this pull on you. But I think a lot of people who know you as an iconic designer and a wonderful designer and kind of a modernist would be interested to know some of your background, who you thought you were going to be, say, in your 20s. I knew you were a theater major, right? And then you were kind of a downtown art chick. I think not everybody knows that whole part of your life where you would. Now, if Mark Lipinski were here, he would say, Denyse, tell the nice people about when you were photographed by Andy Warhol for Paris Vogue, wearing very little. So I'm just inserting that for Mark.
Without Mark here,
since he's not here.
Avoid all of that altogether. Well, I think like any, I did a lot of different things through my 20s and 30s even, and I was just kind of figuring it out. I danced my whole life. That was always a part of my growing up, and when I went to college, I started working with this one choreographer, Carmen Beauchat, who was a part of the whole, she worked with, she was part of the Judson Church dance movement, so she was very connected with Twyla Tharp and Trisha Brown and all those people, and when I danced with her, we used to rehearse at Bob Rauschenberg's house. And so I had a kind of, not really intense, but peripheral sort of association with a lot of those people, and through, I got involved in performance art and met these really cool people and did these strange performance things that had to do with costume and sometimes no costume. And it was these two people, Corey Tippin and Delia Doherty, and they would make these fantastical things, and they were both, or Corey was part of the factory, Andy Warhol's factory. So that's how that, and I was just this 20-year-old kid, like, is that a guy or a girl? I don't know. So, and then that's just one thing led to another. What can I say?
Well, I think one of the things that interests me about your background, as I said, is pulling from so many different things. And I know as far as the dance thing, you even at one point were, another sewing part of your life, you were at one point even sewing tutus for the Boston Ballet.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people also don't know that for a while you considered that you might make your life designing fonts, doing typography, and probably not a lot of people know that she did create a font. It's called Scamp, and people still use it, and you get the occasional royalty check. Is that
I do, at $30 or something like that occasionally, but yeah, I think and maybe what. Now I can say, well, I had this patchwork past, and it all kind of comes together. But I have always felt that as disparate as all my experiences are, even designing a typeface, it's very, I'm all about the details, and have fine motor skills, and designing a typeface, there's the gestural kind of visual part, but then there's the technical aspect where you have to create all the, especially digitally, you have to create all the kerning pairs. You have to, somebody's determining every time you type a capital A and a lowercase e or whatever the letter combination, like the thousands of combinations, somebody, the designer usually is deciding how much space is between those letters. So it's very tedious, but answers a part of who I am, too. Both my parents were engineers, and so I think I have, both right brain, left brain, and certainly quilting, answers both aspects of that. There's the overall design and concept of it, but then there's executing it, and there's a lot of math involved, and it kind of satisfies both aspects. And you said some other things that I was going to talk about.
The tutus?
The tutus. So then I lived in New York for a while and did all those dance and performance things, and then I moved back to Massachusetts for a while, and I had a series of sewing jobs. I worked for a clothing designer in Worcester, Massachusetts. I did a season at the Boston Ballet and made, like sewed tutus, which is quite an experience. I worked at, and during this whole time, it all sounds really interesting, but I was also trying to figure out what did I want to do with my life. Like here I've gone to college, I've wasted my parents' money, like what is it I'm really trying to do? And it just, it took me a while to figure it out. I worked at a monastery making ecclesiastical vesture, which was really fascinating, and I just had a lot of interesting experiences. And then I went back to school and studied graphic design, which I think was a really good decision and gave me a lot of confidence in my own skills. I actually, when I graduated from university, I designed the typeface, but I also took a class cutting letters in stone. And I got really interested in that, and it was also had this sort of like old-timey kind of feeling to it. And I was gonna set up shop and carve headstones. But then I got carpal tunnel, so that didn't end today.
So what was it, what event or series of events moved quilting to the center, and what did it take for you to say, this is my destiny, this is what I'm going to be doing?
Well, I don't know that I knew that at the time. I think it was, that's all those things that I talked about before, kind of working at this graphic design job that, I could make a good living with, but it wasn't that interesting. It wasn't sort of it wasn't ever really an expression of my ideas. And I think falling in love with the historical quilts and everything about that. I knew some people who designed furniture for contemporary home furnishings, and they exhibited at this trade show called the International Contemporary Furniture Fair, and I went to that, and there were all these cool people, and so I started to have this idea that I wanted to make quilts because what I wanted to do, I loved these historical quilts, but at the time when I looked around in the quilting world or in department stores or at quilt shows, nobody was sort of referencing those quilts more kind of accurately, or in the simple spirit that I saw. And I felt that as a designer, if I was interested in those quilts, and to me they had everything. They had pieces of fabric that reminded you of a dress that you had when you were a kid. They had design that looked like a modern painting. And it was sewing, it was, had the sort of idea of people coming together in a quilting bee. It had like all those things, and it was very appealing to me. And I just thought, if I could tell that story to this design community who maybe doesn't think about quilts, and they have a misperception of it. So my goal was to kind of, pitch it out to the design world. And so I started exhibiting at this trade show and doing quilts. And it took a long time, and then all these other things happened along the way, like doing stationery and books. And the weird thing is that I've sort of come full circle, and now I'm designing fabric for the quilting industry, where I really didn't start out there. Again, I had a point I was going to make, and I forgot what it was.
Well, it's interesting. You put this energy out, and you had these different strands of skills, and it seems like a lot of things came to you. And I'm just wondering, for example, Takashimaya, the Japanese department store, used to give you antique kimonos, and you would cut those apart and make quilts. Now, how does something like that happen to you? And it seems to fit so perfectly with the kind of impulse you're talking about, the thing that made you want to create.
Yeah, well, it was from doing this one trade show. So when I started exhibiting there, what was interesting to me was, everybody had cool shoes, number one. It was like a crowd that I wanted to hang out with. And there were some really interesting things happening in furniture and floor coverings, but nobody was doing anything in bedding. And if you walk that show now, there are a lot of companies that have come along, Dwell Bedding and all these other companies. But at the time that I started, nobody was even thinking about bedding. And so, you know, how clearly was I thinking about it or not, I don't know, but, you know, to me it seemed like it really fit in, but I also really stood out because nobody else was doing anything like that. The quilts were very colorful, so they made a big impact. And the show was one that, you know, got a lot of press coverage in the design press, so like shelter magazines and design magazines, and that got me out in front of people very slowly, but, you know, I think the first year that I exhibited there, I had the New York Times shot a story called Household Names, and it ran in their home design supplement the following October, and I had a full page. That doesn't really, you know, happen. And it's not like it makes you wealthy overnight, but it, you know, that sort of accumulates and builds over time. And the show led to just about everything that I ever did. The stationery show happened at the same time, so I had a Chronicle Books asked me to do stationery and then a book. And Takashimaya was one of the first customers that I had, and I didn't even know anything about the store at the time. And they gave me, you know, these vintage kimono. It was terrifying to have to cut them up, and I'm like, what do you want me to do? And they're like, anything you want, which was very scary. And the good thing is, I didn't have a lot of time, and they were all hand quilted. So I would get the kimono in July. They wanted them in store for a holiday, and there's not a lot of time to second guess, which I'm very good at. So, and there were strong parameters, which I like as a designer. I like solving problems. The fabric made for kimonos is only this wide, and it had to be foundation pieced, so you know, there were clear parameters, you know, like that I had to kind of design within, and I liked that challenge a lot. And they're mostly monochromatic, and it's a huge body of work that most people have never seen that I do. I think I made probably at least 50 quilts for them over the years.
Would you talk a little bit about your studio setup now, and what you're set up to do, what your studio looks like? I've been to it, and it's a wonderful workspace, but it's very interesting to see the mix of technology. You have all your computers and everything, and you have a 20-year-old brother sewing machine that just goes, you know, back and forth. So just talk a little bit about the setup and how you work there.
Well, I think having grown up in central Massachusetts, which, you know, is an old, you know, there's a lot of textile manufacturing and manufacturing in general, and like so many of those cities where I am now, Bridgeport, Connecticut, was an old manufacturing city that kind of fell on hard times. So I've always been drawn to these places that have these empty buildings. It feels like there's so much possibility there, whether it's true or not. So my studio is in this it's a factory building, and they used to make lace trims there. It was called American Fabrics. So it seems appropriate that our space is there. And we have, you know, it's great light, really high ceilings, and there's a great group of other artists and designers in the building, which makes it really nice. And having been a graphic designer, you know, I learned graphic design at the time when the Apple computer was becoming integral to that, and so I was very well versed in the software, the graphic, you know, like Illustrator and stuff. So I still use that for designing my quilts and drawing my fabric, and so of course I have computers. But other than that, you know, I have a really old Brother Industrial, and I like things to be simple. I don't like to, I don't have, you know, especially as a quilter, it's embarrassing, but I was pretty much self-taught. I always, you know, had some books that I might have looked at the pictures, but I never really read. And you know, I shouldn't admit that out loud, but it's true. And so I'm sure that I don't maybe like in my own books, I tell how to do things in the most roundabout or laborious way, but it's just, that's how I do it, or how I learned, or, as, like, from whatever angle I'm coming at it.
So you do teach a lot of improvisational workshops, so it's the improvisational quilting, but you're talking about these designs that you do on your computer, and that is not improvisational, that is coming up with a design, and then where does your inspiration come from? How does that process, and what, I don't know, I guess I'm also interested in the mix, you're doing things that are for exhibition, you're doing things that are, for a while you're doing like Pottery Barn, right? So these are things that are going to be reproduced. Where do these design influences come, and how does the process go?
Well, I think, I look at a lot of different things. I look at painting, I look at fashion, I look at design, magazines or books or just about anything, but always the historical quilts also are a huge part of the influence on what I do, and whether it's, it always starts with an idea and a sketch, whether I'm, the fabric obviously is coming from feed sack type prints and stuff like that. So I'm always kind of looking at historical stuff as a starting place, and then just hopefully bringing my own kind of imprint to it. What was the question?
Well, sort of about the process, but now one of your fabrics, Flea Market Fancy, which was very popular. Are you still a flea market girl?
Wearing a skirt.
Is to flea markets, that's still a source for, do you go buy quilts, or do you look for the...
Yeah, usually quilts, or, it can be anything. It can be printed ephemera, it can be, clothing, but often quilts. I just love going to the flea markets, or, it's just, I guess it's always that feeling of like, like you've discovered something, even though obviously you haven't. It's there for everybody to see, and it's something, I guess, and I love this nostalgia of a lot of that stuff from another era, and the flea market just, has like a lot of, and I've always been interested in mixing things. All one note isn't that interesting to me, but the right mixture, and it's a very particular balance, I think, of things. It's, and everybody has their own unique expression, and it's just a matter of finding, I try to find the right balance that's right for me, and, fortunately, people respond to that, but I think, we all have our own voice that we can sort of figure out how to express that, whatever it is we're interested in.
One of the things that was interesting to me, and I had interviewed you before for the Wall Street Journal, is this, I thought you'd be very modern, and like I said, with your technology. And interesting to me is that you do these great designs, and a lot of your pieces, you do machine piece them, but then you send them out to be hand quilted. That really surprised me, number one. And number two, they're very simple patterns. A lot of quilts today, it's elaborate. It's machine quilting, and it's the more stitches, the better. It's like, how many miles of stitches and thread are in your quilt? But tell me a little bit about that. Does that surprise people? And what is that part of this sort of the homemadeness and the...
Yeah, it's also an aesthetic that, to me, I kind of, especially on the machine quilted stuff, I've stuck with this figure 8 because it's even, so it's an even texture, and it's not sort of hard angles, and I work with somebody who does my long arm quilting, and I'm not interested in patterns that are telling a different story other than what the quilt is, like kitties and moon, stars. Like it's just not my thing, and it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just it's not my aesthetic, and yeah, there's a, it's just a matter of, and I think because I started out not in the quilt world, because I was making quilts for a different audience, I didn't have, I didn't feel like I had to behave or
No
or
quilt police.
do things like a certain way. And thank God for that, because, like however many years later, it's what I do, and I feel like, well, I've gotten this far already, like making my living doing it, so it must be okay.
And with all the business side of things that you're doing, do you ever have a chance to just say, I'm going to make this quilt for the pure pleasure of it, or for another person, or is it just so much now your business that you're...
Yeah. I don't have that much free time, and I think it's like anybody who does a particular thing, like the carpenter, has all the unfinished construction jobs at home, or I just, I think the last thing I want to do is get behind a sewing machine when I have free time. One of the last projects that I kind of made start to finish was one of the quilts in my book. And of course, making a book is a very labor-intensive.
And let's say, give the title of your current book.
Modern Quilts, Traditional Inspiration. So in this book, and all the quilts that are on display there are from the book, and it was my chance to kind of pay homage to all those historical quilts that inspired me in the first place. But one of the quilts in the book is a little doll quilt, and I hand-pieced it and hand-quilted it, and I got to watch movies while I did it and enjoyed every second of it. It was really nice. And I knit occasionally, but lately I'm just trying to do less. I'm trying to do less, because it's really easy in today's world. Like everybody's on devices and communicating all the time, and I'm finding it exhausting these days. So I'm just trying to learn how to get back to something that feels simpler.
That's great. Talking a little bit about aesthetics and all of that, what do you think, impossible question alert, makes a great quilt?
Oh. Well, if it's something, that everybody's going to respond to different things and have different ideas about what a great quilt is. For me, it's one that makes me kind of stop and pay attention. And it can be, I love everything from, a quilt at the flea market that's just got 800 million prints in it and tiny little patches, to something, that's really simple, or like a whole cloth quilt. And so it really, I don't know, those kind of absolute questions are kind of hard for me. But something that is authentic in and of itself, it has like an honesty. Whether it's a quilt or anything else, there's a quality to it that it's not trying to be anything bigger or less. It just has this particular quality that to me feels like it's authentic in itself, and that's something that I respond to.
As far as things, you said, and other things, other kinds of artworks, are there particular artists who work in textiles or in any medium that you feel have influenced you, that you really respond to, and or they influenced you?
Well, there are a lot of artists that I look at. I love Louise Bourgeois and Agnes Martin, and painters like that. And there are. Oh, I'm having. I knew this was going to happen. I was going to make like a cheat sheet. There are people here in this audience, like Heather and Luke Haynes, whose work I think is really amazing. And again, sort of true. They're doing work that's true to themselves, which is always beautiful, no matter what form it takes.
Now, you have been called sort of a godmother of modern quilting. And you are looked upon as somebody who has helped kind of birth this movement and the sensibility, the aesthetic in this movement. And you are, in fact, the keynote speaker for the Modern Quilt Guild's first quilt convention, the QuiltCon, which is going to be in Austin, Texas in February. How do you feel about that? Modern quilting, what does that mean? Do you feel like you are, that this movement sprang from you in some way? How does that feel?
No, I mean, I think like anything else, everybody in retrospect always tries to kind of explain it, and it's funny with these days, it happens so fast that, we're kind of finding the origins of things like in real time, which is kind of odd. And I think, well, it's flattering. I try not to take it too seriously, because I think I was in a place and a time, and I was always presenting my work. I was doing, it's great. On one hand, I think, oh, okay, I kind of got my message out there, and, it took a long time, but, people noticed, and that's really gratifying. And on the other hand, nothing is ever one person. It's a kind of confluence of events and things that happen. And, when I started out, I used the word modern because I was talking to an audience that, didn't have any other kind of reference point. And in some ways, was that the right word? I'm not really sure. And I've never been very good at absolutes. I kind of recoil from them, because to me nothing is all one thing or another, and however it gets defined, that I'll leave that to someone else to do the defining.
Just a couple of things here. Why is quilt making important to your life?
I think for me it gave me an opportunity to build a life, and earn a living doing something that was uniquely my own, or I was able to do work that is my designs, and that that's an amazing opportunity to be able to have spent the last 16 years doing my own work, and where it'll go, I don't really know, but yeah.
What do you think is the importance of quilts in American life today?
Well, I
You're
think
allowed
they've
to have
always,
some water.
Thank you.
Let's give the girl a break here.
Well, quilts, I think what's great about quilts is they're a beautiful design object, but they're also a useful object. All the things that they represent, warmth and family and sharing and community, to have that sort of embedded in a functional object is pretty spectacular. And I love what is the quilting community and how generous and responsive everybody is. It's just, if you look, I'm sure you all have friends that you quilt with or sew with, and today online that there's another kind of community, I think is really amazing, and I'm just grateful to be a part of it.
Looking ahead, you said who knows where it will lead, but do you have some next challenges in mind, or some next things that are important
well,
to you?
Well, I'd like
to
to get back to making quilts, and I'm going to have a show at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah in October 2013. So they want 16 pieces, so I'll be working on some quilts this year, which is really great.
That's wonderful. And you'll continue to design fabric?
And I'm going to continue to design fabric.
In your simpler life?
In my simpler life.
That you have in mind here. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like the world to know, that you would like to have in the Library of Congress about you?
No.
Okay, I want to thank you so much, Denyse Schmidt, for doing this and for being willing to do it publicly, because usually that's not how we do these. We're ending up this Q.S.O.S. interview at FIT at the Quilters Take Manhattan event at 2:22 p.m.